Right, thank you very much indeed, and welcome to this technical track presentation. Hope I won't bore you too much by it, but what we're trying to do today is talk about some of the missing bits that are involved in Going Google that we discovered as a school. And I think we all agree that there's loads of advantages through Going Google, but there's a lot of difficulties in getting the system up and running from a technical perspective. And so I want to talk about those. I am the head of IT at Weds Cathedral School in Somerset, and we're a school of about 700 students from age 3 through 18. We're a music academy, and as such we have some pretty stringent media requirements. And we went Google in 2010, so we've got 3 years of operations under our belt. The barriers that we found to actually getting Google up and running, first of all, was the fund thing back then, which is probably a lot less prevalent than it is today, and issues of the actual money associated with making the switch. So that, together with this a lack of skills that were applicable to the cloud environment, and perhaps a misunderstanding and lack of understanding of how to get there, was the hurdles that we faced back then 3 years ago. So what we needed really was this reliable zero incremental cost plan, a recipe of how to get from the infrastructure that we had then back to one now that supports the cloud and Google Apps fully. So the problem is, in a school or any enterprise, there are an enormous number of different technologies that you have to get right. It's an ecosystem that has to work together as a whole. You can't just replace one bit of it, and without the whole coherent story, it's difficult to know where to start. So I'm presenting here a laundry list, a long laundry list that I'll go through slide by slide, if you will, of the different types of technologies that we had to get right and what our solutions were. And these slides will be available online so that you can pick up the story afterwards. The first thing you've got to have, of course, is a really reliable LAN backbone. That's something that you would have already, and if you don't, you're in trouble anyway. We're running totally ProCurve with 10 gig backbones and gig to the desktop. That's fine. So I'm sort of taking that as a given. But when you're talking about a cloud-based operation, the first different thing is that you really have to have a fast and reliable WAN. Now, many people are blessed with just being able to call up their telco and get a fiber cable dropped in. Way out in the sticks in Somerset, we weren't able to do that. So one of the things that we had to do was to bring together, aggregate lots of DSL lines into one sort of broad, resilient connection. The technology, and this is the first tip I'm going to give you today that allows you to do that you've really got to look up if you're thinking of going Google and you're not quite sure how, from the WAN perspective, is get yourself pfSense, first of all. pfSense is a brilliant core router that's going to solve a lot of the problems that you would all previously have turned to, for example, a big Cisco router for. You can get a bandwidth with that on a bunch of aggregated lines. Here we've got 10 or 12 aggregated regular DSL lines that are giving us a connection of something well north of 100 megabits per second, which is fine performance-wise for a school of 700 students and about 300 staff. The directory services, how you organize that, there's many ways that you can do that. I mentioned before that we're a music academy, and what that means is that we use a lot of Macs, as well as we use Chromebooks, as well as we use Windows. And so you've got to have a coherent directory services strategy. You've basically got to build it on Active Directory, whether you like it or not. And the reason for that is because so many different services, like printer technology and so forth, is going to be tying into your Active Directory. But there's not a problem, because you can build through Google Apps Directory Sync a coherent single password system. That's what we do. We have a couple of server cores 2008 server core domain controllers, and they work perfectly well with Google Apps Directory Sync. They don't, however, work with password sync, unfortunately, which would be really nice if they did. So you're stuck with the having to sync it every night approach that Google Apps Directory Sync provides. So you've got your WAN, you've got your Active Directory tied up to all of your Google Apps Directory syncs. The next thing you're going to need is ubiquitous Wi-Fi across your campus. We have about a 50-acre campus, and it's another one of those things when we're talking about each of these items, oftentimes they turn out, when you get the supplier in, they turn out to be a £30,000 item. This is no exception. And the problem is with £30,000 items is that one by one they build up. You saw the laundry list at the beginning, multiply that by 30,000. It ends up being a figure which, you know, the bursar isn't too happy about, the finance department may not be so happy about. So getting Wi-Fi, we looked at lots and lots of different solutions, all the ones that you can find around here today, but one perhaps that's not very well represented here today is one from a company out of California called Ubiquiti. And the Ubiquiti Unify solution allows you to have a fully managed solution. It's managed from the cloud. In other words, you run the controller in the cloud. All of the access points are running independently from that perspective, and they are operating, whether they're in remote sites or whether on the main site, all managed from a cloud-based server. It's fully managed. You get all the kind of, don't have anything to do with Ubiquiti, by the way, but you get all of the management stuff that you might expect in a fully managed system. The next thing is content filtering. As you go up from, now you're getting so much reliance on your WAN, so much information from the cloud that you're pushing hundreds of megabits in through your WAN connection, and you've got to filter that. It's another one of those £30,000 items that you get yourself tied up to unless you go, for example, OpenDNS. OpenDNS works exceptionally well for us. We take a light touch approach to content filtering, but this is tied in together with running in pfSense that I mentioned earlier. Certain additional filtering in there that, for example, stops people from modifying their DNS lookups and so forth and getting around the system. But we're not really trying to lock down the system. What we're trying to do is avoid people inadvertently getting to the wrong stuff. The rest of it is an education issue. Printing's pretty demanding when you're running iPads, Macs, Windows, and Chromebooks. Something that's going to really help you there is PaperCut. PaperCut is a proprietary solution, but it does provide you with the ability to cloud print even shared printers, follow me printers and that kind of thing, together with air printing, together with Mac printing and so forth. For virtualization, because we have some of our servers running on-site, we have some of our servers running off-site in a private cloud. Proxmox is a solution, that's another tip for you, that runs the Linux KVM virtualization system. It's a really good way of virtualizing your system and being able to control it, again, through web browsers, because you're moving into a world where you're doing everything in a web browser. This is an entirely web browser managed system, unlike something like VMware, where you might have to run Windows instances just to manage your systems. And the advantage of it is because it can also be put out there in the cloud, you can have the same system in your private cloud and move virtual machines backwards and forwards within the clusters from your private cloud on-site and back and forth. So that's a really handy thing to be able to do. The remote sites, we have several remote sites that aren't actually tied directly into our main systems. Remote sites are managed using OpenVPN. OpenVPN is an inherent part of pfSense. You can see why I mentioned pfSense at the beginning as a really good tip. You're going to be using that a lot. And so, for example, a new sixth form boarding house we've opened doesn't get fibered and cabled in like it would traditionally to our core system. It operates as a kind of a virtual Starbucks model. By that I mean all the students in that boarding house are accessing their data as if they were in Starbucks. I, as the IT guy, don't have to worry about the security of that system. It's handled by going out into the cloud and back again. Our European data center, as I mentioned, here we've got the KVM-based virtualization cluster. That's another remote site. We happen to put some of our servers out there. For example, we run ISAMs, we run Firefly. Those are running out in a European data center. And the reason they're doing that is so that we get a really fat pipe to all of our subscribers, whether they're parents or whether they're students anywhere in the world. Because what we're trying to do is to leverage the cloud to get us scale and scope. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? The whole point is to get as many users as we want without having to worry about what our internal systems are doing, and to be able to have the scope of working across the whole world. Our on-site primary storage is also a little unconventional in order that we can support the Mac systems natively, in order that we can support all our Unix systems natively, and whilst also supporting Windows with all its requirements. We turn to Synology. We use Synology for our student and staff shares. We find it works really well for hundreds of users. We don't have any problem with that at all. One of the advantages of it is that it can be rsync backed up to basically Unix servers. It can also be the target for our KVM backups, so we can back up our virtual machines directly to it as well. So it's basically a Swiss Army knife of storage. It's really easy to use, it's easy to back up, and it handles failed drives and so forth really, really elegantly. And again, it's all web-based. So anything we need to do on this system, it just needs a web browser, any web browser. The on-site backup storage, well, it's only for backup. So we're running NAS for free. It works really well. As I say, it's running rsync NFS shares to do the backups of our major systems. Our wired telephony. Our wired telephony is based on Cisco endpoints, but the PBX itself is not a Cisco endpoint, and we're not using a cloud provider either. Another tip for you here, when you're looking at voice over IP, look at 3CX. We've been running 3CX really, really happily for about 6 or 9 months now. We're running through multiple SIP providers, so we've got multiple SIP trunks running on EFM circuit dedicated to our voice over IP, and it works excellently with Cisco, but it works equally well with many other endpoints. So you have the ability, which is really important here, to choose whichever's the endpoint is the best for you, whether that's Cisco in this case, or maybe it's not. Maybe you're doing a SIP endpoint, which is a gate entry control, or maybe you're doing speakerphone devices for monitoring purposes. You can just pick and choose whichever is the best for your solution. Looking at cloud solutions, again, there are many, many business integration things that work excellently with Google Apps. You all probably know how well you can tie in email and calendaring and other systems to do workflows within your school. But you're also going to be running things like help desks for your facilities, help desks for IT. We use one that's particularly good. It's called Mojo Help Desk. Another little tip for you. Mojo Help Desk ties natively into Google Apps, so it's a single sign-on approach. You don't have to have multiple passwords and user IDs. It just works really, really well for that. Site monitoring. We're using XProtect from Milestone. XProtect is quite an expensive solution, but the advantage that it offers, first of all, is like the 3CX does in the telephony space, allowing us to pick and choose whichever endpoint we want. We can pick and choose whichever is the right kind of camera endpoint for us in this environment. So the other thing is, again, manageable through any web browser. It's not tied into, say, an Internet Explorer web browser. It doesn't need plugins. And it works on iPads and so forth. So these are all key features of any architecture, I think, that you're trying to put together in a cloud era. Our access control, and that's the last slide you'll be pleased to hear I have for you, is done through Salto Access. This is an approach that we use where these cards are basically the network. Works really well. I'd recommend that one. Doesn't really matter whether this is in a cloud-based environment or not, quite honestly, but I'm just tagging this in the end because we like it and we've used it and it could be a useful tip for you. So that's it. That's all I have in terms of hints and tips of an infrastructure that work together as a coherent whole. But if you have any questions, be very pleased to answer those. Yes, there's one over here.
What's your yearly operational budget?
That's a very good question. The yearly operational budget is around about £50,000. That excludes staff. We have 3 members of staff, including myself. So I have 3 members of staff, 50,000. That includes hardware and software. So that's a benchmark. That's a really good question. I'd love to know what other people are working with. Yeah, any other questions about the technologies that I talked about here? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today. That's all. Thank you.